The firewood appeared like clockwork, stacked neatly against the stone wall beside his door, and Simon Rothwell had no idea who was leaving it there, or why they would bother with a man everyone else had forgotten. He woke that first morning in late autumn to find the pile arranged with such precision that he thought perhaps he had stacked it himself the night before and simply forgotten, though his leg throbbed with the memory of why that would have been impossible. The wood was dry, seasoned oak and birch, cut to perfect lengths for his small hearth. Simon stood in his doorway with his walking stick gripped tight, scanning the tree line that pressed close against his isolated homestead. Nothing moved except the morning mist rising from the cold ground. The second morning brought another stack, placed atop the first. The third morning, another. By the fourth morning, Simon's confusion had transformed into something else. A nervous awareness that someone was watching his home, learning his habits, waiting for the darkest hours before dawn to approach unseen. He had been a soldier once, before the war injury that left him with a leg that would never fully heal, and a discharge that came with a small pension, and this remote plot of land on the frontier. The kingdom had been generous in its way, giving him distance from the cities where he might have been reminded daily of what he had lost. But distance meant isolation, and isolation meant vulnerability. Out here, beyond the last human settlements, the forests belonged to things that did not love mankind. Orcs, mostly. The border skirmishes that had shattered his knee had been against orc raiders, and though the war had ended with an uneasy truce, old hatreds died slowly on both sides. Simon knew what his fellow veterans would say about mysterious gifts appearing at his door. It was a trap, a cruel game, something to lull him into complacency before the attack came. But firewood was not a weapon, and whoever was bringing it was careful not to wake him, not to disturb anything else, not to leave any trace except the neat stacks of kindling that kept his cottage warm as winter approached. On the seventh morning, Simon decided to stop wondering and start watching. He stayed awake through the night, positioned in the shadows of his small barn where he could see the cottage door. His leg ached from standing, but he braced himself against the wall and kept his eyes fixed on the darkness. The hours crawled past. Frost formed on the grass. His breath misted in the cold air, and he wrapped his cloak tighter, fighting the urge to return to his warm bed. Dawn was still an hour away when he heard the soft scrape of wood on wood. So quiet he almost missed it beneath the whisper of wind through the trees. Simon pressed himself flatter against the barn wall, peering around the corner. A figure moved in the pre-dawn gloom, broad-shouldered and cautious, carrying an armload of firewood toward his door. The silhouette was distinctive even in the darkness, too tall, too powerfully built to be human. As the figure knelt to arrange the wood, the faint light of the waning moon caught green skin and the slight protrusion of small tusks. An orc. A woman, from the curves visible even beneath her heavy traveling cloak. Simon's heart hammered against his ribs. His hand instinctively went to his belt, though he had not worn a sword since his discharge. He had no weapon except his walking stick, and he was alone with an orc who had been coming to his home every morning for a week. She worked quickly, stacking the wood with the same meticulous care he had noticed before. Her movements were practiced, efficient, but there was something almost reverent in the way she placed each piece. When she finished, she did not immediately leave. Instead, she remained kneeling there, one hand resting on the stack as though she were saying a prayer or making a wish. Simon made his decision before he could talk himself out of it. He stepped out from behind the barn, his walking stick tapping against the frozen ground. The orc woman spun toward the sound, rising to her feet in one fluid motion. She was easily as tall as him, perhaps taller, with broad shoulders and muscular arms. Her black hair was pulled back in a thick braid, and her green skin seemed almost luminous in the dim light. But what struck him most was her face, the fear and shame written across it as clearly as if she had spoken. "Please," she said, and her voice was rough and low but unmistakably feminine. "I mean no harm. I will go. I will not return." "Wait," Simon said, though every instinct told him this was foolish. "I just want to know why." She froze, her dark eyes wide. For a long moment neither of them moved. The dawn was beginning to break now, painting the sky with streaks of gray and pink. "You do not know me," she said finally. "But I know you. You are Simon Rothwell. You were wounded in the border wars, in the autumn campaign 3 years past." Simon's grip tightened on his walking stick. "How do you know that?" The orc woman looked down at her hands, those strong fingers that had stacked his firewood with such care. "Because I was there. I was with the clan that ambushed your company in the Thornwood Valley. I saw you fall. I saw your brothers carry you from the field while my people cut down the others." The memory hit Simon like a physical blow. The screaming, the blood, the moment when his knee had shattered and the world had gone white with pain. He had been barely conscious when his fellow soldiers dragged him to safety, leaving him with only fragments of that terrible day. "You were one of the raiders," he said, and his voice came out flat and cold. "Yes." She met his eyes now, and there was no defiance in her gaze, only a deep and terrible sorrow. "I killed 3 men that day. I celebrated our victory. I believed we were defending our lands from invaders, that every human who fell was justice for the ones who had driven us from the river valleys." Simon said nothing. What could he say? She was right in her way. The war had been ugly on both sides, full of old grievances and new cruelties. "But then I saw you," she continued. "Months later, when I was hunting alone in these woods, I saw you at your cottage and I recognized your face. You were trying to chop wood and your leg kept failing you and you fell. You lay there in the dirt for a long time before you could stand again." Her voice cracked slightly and she drew a shaking breath. "I have killed and I have raided and I have done things I thought were right. But watching you struggle, alone and hurting because of what we did to you, I felt shame for the first time. You were just a man trying to survive, and we broke you for following your lord's orders, just as we followed our chiefs." Simon stared at her, trying to reconcile this hulking orc warrior with the person who had been secretly helping him. "So you started bringing me firewood." "It is all I could think to do," she said softly. "I cannot heal your leg. I cannot give you back what the war took from you, but I could make the winter a little easier. I could do this one small thing to balance the scales, even though I know it changes nothing." The sun was rising properly now, golden light spilling across the clearing. In the daylight, Simon could see her more clearly, the scars on her arms, the weariness in her face, the way she held herself ready to run at any moment. "What is your name?" he asked. She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Mara Ashfall of the Broken Spear clan, or I was before I left them." "You left your clan," Mara nodded slowly. "When I told them I wanted to make peace, to stop raiding the human settlements, they cast me out. They said I had gone soft, that I had forgotten the old ways. So I have been living alone in the forest, hunting and foraging, and bringing you firewood when I can." Simon did not know what to feel. Anger, perhaps, for the men who had died in that ambush. Suspicion that this was still some elaborate trick. But what he felt most strongly was a strange kinship, because he knew what it was like to be cast aside by the people you had served. "The wood is good," he said finally. "Thank you for it." Mara's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable despite her size and strength. "You do not want me to leave?" I did not say that either, Simon replied. But you have been bringing me firewood for a week and you have not tried to hurt me. That counts for something. She stood there uncertainly, as though waiting for him to change his mind to shout at her or drive her away. When he did neither, she took a careful step backward. I should go. It is not safe for you if someone sees us together. Humans do not trust orcs, and with good reason. Wait, Simon said again. If you are going to keep bringing firewood, you might as well do it during daylight. My nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. No one is going to see you. Mara stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign language. You want me to come back? I am saying if you are going to come back anyway, you do not need to sneak around in the dark. You will hurt yourself stumbling around in the forest before dawn. He paused, then added, and if you are willing to stack firewood, I have other work that needs doing around the homestead. Work I cannot manage with this leg. It was a risk, and he knew it. But something in Mara's face when she spoke of her shame, of watching him struggle alone, had struck a chord in him. He had been so isolated for so long, and here was someone offering help, however strange the circumstances. I do not understand, Mara said quietly. Why would you trust me? I am one of the people who destroyed your leg, who killed your friends. I do not trust you, Simon said honestly. Not yet, but you have been trying to make amends, and that is more than most people do. So if you want to keep trying, I will let you, but no more sneaking around. If we are going to do this, we do it honestly. Mara was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. I will come back tomorrow, during the day. Good, Simon said, though his heart was still pounding with the strangeness of it all. Bring an axe if you have one. The woodpile needs splitting. She almost smiled at that, just a slight quirk of her lips that showed the edges of her small tusks. Then she turned and walked back toward the forest, moving with surprising grace for someone so large. Simon watched her go until she disappeared between the trees, and only then did he realize he was shaking. He had just invited an orc, one of the raiders, who had nearly killed him, to come work at his homestead. His old commanding officer would have called him mad. His fellow veterans would have called him a traitor. But standing there in the morning light, looking at the neat stack of firewood that Mara had left for him, Simon thought perhaps this was the sanest thing he had done since the war ended. The next morning, Mara arrived just after dawn. She carried a well-worn axe over her shoulder and a canvas bag that, she explained shyly, held some smoked rabbit she had caught. Simon showed her the pile of unsplit logs behind his cottage, and she set to work without another word. Watching her work was humbling. She split wood with an efficiency that made his own efforts look clumsy, the axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Her strength was obvious, but it was her precision that impressed him. She knew exactly where to strike each log to split it cleanly, wasting no motion or energy. Simon brought her water at midday, and they sat in awkward silence while she drank. He found himself studying her face, noticing details he had missed in the darkness. There was a scar across her left eyebrow, and her hands were calloused from years of hard work. She looked tired, he realized, with the kind of weariness that came from more than just physical labor. How long have you been living alone in the forest? He asked. Mara set down the water cup. 6 months, perhaps 7. Time blurs when you have no one to mark it with. That is a long time to be alone, she shrugged, a gesture that was surprisingly human. It is better than staying with people who hate what you have become. The clan wanted warriors, not peacemakers. They said I was choosing humans over my own kind. Are you, Simon asked, choosing humans? No, Mara said firmly. I am choosing to stop killing. That is not the same thing. I am tired of blood and fighting and watching people die for borders that will shift again in another generation. Humans and orcs have been fighting for so long that no one remembers why it started, only that it must continue. I want no part of it anymore." Simon understood that sentiment more than she might have guessed. "I felt the same way when they discharged me. I was angry at first because I thought they were throwing me away. But now I think perhaps being thrown away saved me. I do not have to fight anymore. I can just live." "Just living is harder than it sounds," Mara said softly. "Yes," Simon agreed. "It is." They sat together in the weak autumn sunlight, two broken soldiers from opposite sides of a war that had ground them both down and spit them out. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, not friendship yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. Mara came back the next day and the day after that. She split all of Simon's firewood, then repaired the sagging corner of his barn, then helped him reinforce his chicken coop against winter predators. She worked tirelessly, seeming to take satisfaction in the tangible results of her labor. Simon, for his part, found himself looking forward to her arrivals, to having another person to talk to after months of solitude. They spoke carefully at first, avoiding topics that might lead to dangerous territory. But gradually, as the days turned into weeks, they began to share more. Mara told him about her childhood in the Broken Spear clan, about learning to fight and hunt, about the traditions and songs of her people. Simon told her about his own upbringing, about joining the army to escape a father who drank too much, about the friends he had lost in the war. "Do you hate orcs?" Mara asked one afternoon. They were mending a section of fence, and she had been uncharacteristically quiet all morning. Simon considered the question seriously. "I did for a while. When I first woke up in the medical tent and they told me I would never walk properly again, I hated every orc in the world. I thought about all the things I would never do, all the life I had lost, and I wanted someone to blame. And now," Mara's voice was carefully neutral, "now I think hate takes too much energy," Simon said. "I was so tired of being angry all the time. And then you started bringing me firewood, and I had to decide whether I was going to hold onto that hate or let it go." He paused, then added, "I chose to let it go. It was easier with you making it possible for me to survive the winter." Mara was quiet for a long moment, her strong hand still on the fence post. "I do not know if I deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Simon said honestly, "but I am not forgiving you for your sake. I am forgiving you for mine, because I want to be able to sit here and mend this fence with you without feeling like I am betraying the men who died. They are gone, and I am still here, and I get to choose what kind of life I live with the time I have left." "That is a good way to think about it," Mara said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." Winter came on fast that year, arriving with an early snowstorm that blanketed the homestead in white. Simon woke to find Mara already at work, clearing the snow from his door and paths. She had brought fresh meat, a deer she had taken down the day before, and they spent the morning butchering it together and hanging the strips to smoke. "You should stay in the cottage," Simon said, as the wind picked up and the temperature dropped. "It is too cold to walk back to wherever you have been sleeping." Mara hesitated, clearly torn between wanting shelter and not wanting to impose. "I have a camp. It is not far." "A camp is not a house. Stay, I have a spare room." She did stay, though she insisted on sleeping in the barn at first, claiming she did not want to make him uncomfortable. It took 3 more snowstorms before she finally accepted his offer of the small room off the kitchen. Simon pretended not to notice how thin her blankets were, or how relieved she looked to sleep somewhere warm and dry. Having Mara in the house changed things. The cottage that had felt empty and cold for so long suddenly felt alive. She woke early and built up the fire. She cooked meals that were better than anything Simon had managed on his own. She mended his clothes without being asked and noticed when he was having a bad day with his leg, bringing him willow bark tea without comment. Simon found himself watching her when she did not notice, studying the way she moved, the expressions that crossed her face when she thought no one was looking. She was beautiful, he realized with some surprise. Not in the delicate way human women were supposed to be beautiful, but in the way a storm was beautiful, or a mountain powerful and untamed and real. He tried not to think about it too much. She was an orc, and he was human, and there were 1,000 reasons why anything beyond friendship was impossible. But the thought kept returning, especially on the long winter evenings when they sat by the fire together, talking or reading or simply existing in comfortable silence. Mara seemed to be struggling with something too. Simon caught her looking at him sometimes with an expression he could not quite read, something between longing and fear. She never said anything, though, and he did not ask. The worst storm of the season hit in the dead of winter, a howling blizzard that buried the cottage in snow and made it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the windows. They were trapped inside for 3 days, rationing their food and huddling close to the fire. On the second night, Simon's legs seized up with the kind of pain that left him gasping and gray-faced. Mara helped him to his bed and brought him the strongest medicine he had, but nothing seemed to touch the agony. She sat beside him through the night, her large hand wrapped around his, her presence steady and comforting. "I am sorry," she whispered at one point, and Simon knew she was not just apologizing for his pain, but for the injury that caused it, for the war, for everything. "Not your fault," he managed through gritted teeth. "Not anymore." When he finally fell into an exhausted sleep near dawn, Mara was still there, her head resting on the edge of his bed. He woke hours later to find her in the same position, and something in his chest twisted at the sight. The storm passed, and life returned to normal, but something had shifted between them. The distance that they had both carefully maintained was eroding, replaced by something warmer and more dangerous. They touched more casually now, a hand on an arm, a brush of shoulders as they worked side by side. They lingered over meals, reluctant to end the conversations. They found excuses to be near each other. Simon knew he was falling in love, and the knowledge terrified him. He had not expected to fall in love again after the war, had thought that part of his life was over. And he certainly had never imagined falling in love with an orc, with one of the enemy, with someone so different from himself in every possible way. But Mara was not the enemy anymore, if she ever truly had been. She was the person who had quietly saved his life by keeping him warm through the winter. She was the person who made him laugh and challenged his opinions and sat with him through the pain. She was the person he wanted to see first thing in the morning and last thing at night. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal the muddy earth beneath. As the weather warmed, Simon noticed Mara becoming restless, spending more time staring out at the forest. She had not mentioned leaving, but he could see the thought weighing on her. "You do not have to go," he said one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mara turned to look at him, surprise evident in her face. "How did you know I was thinking about it? You have had that look for weeks. Like you are waiting for something to end." She sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest. "Winter is over. You do not need me to chop wood or hunt anymore. I have repaid my debt to you. It is time for me to move on. What if I do not want you to move on?" Simon said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "What if I want you to stay because I care about you, not because you owe me anything?" Mara went very still. "Simon, you do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I am saying. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, and the thought of you leaving makes me feel like I am losing something precious that I only just found." "I am an orc," Mara said, and her voice was rough with emotion. "You are human. Our people hate each other. If anyone found out, they would call you a traitor and call me a seducer or a monster. There is no future for us." "There is a future if we choose to make one," Simon argued. "Out here we are alone. No one has to know. We can just be ourselves without armies or clans or anyone telling us who we are supposed to hate." Mara stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "You do not understand. I am the one who hurt you. I am the reason you suffer every day with that leg." "How can you love someone who did that to you?" "Because you are also the one who saved me," Simon said, standing as well despite the protest from his bad knee. "You are the one who cared enough to try to make amends. You are the one who made this place feel like a home instead of a prison. The person you were during the war is not the person you are now." "How do you know that?" Mara's voice broke. "How do you know I will not wake up one day and remember that I am supposed to hate humans, that I am supposed to be the monster everyone thinks I am?" Simon stepped close to her, close enough to see the tears gathering in her dark eyes. "Because I know you. I have spent months watching you choose kindness over hatred every single day. I have seen you be gentle with injured animals and patient with my bad moods and generous with everything you have. You are not a monster. You are the best person I have ever known." Mara stared at him, her breathing ragged, and then suddenly she was kissing him, her lips fierce and desperate against his. Simon wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and for a long, perfect moment nothing else existed except the two of them. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. Mara pressed her forehead against his, her tusks just barely brushing his cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you for so long, and I was so afraid to say it. I thought you could never feel the same way about someone like me." "Someone like you is exactly who I want," Simon said. "Strong and brave and kind. Someone who knows what it is to be broken and chooses to keep going anyway. You are everything I did not know I needed." They stood there holding each other as the last light faded from the sky, and Simon felt something he had not felt since before the war: hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that was better than the past. But hope, as they both should have known, was a fragile thing. The men came 3 weeks later, a patrol from the nearest human settlement. Simon saw them from a distance and felt his blood turn to ice. There were 6 of them, armed and wearing the colors of the frontier militia. Mara was in the barn, and he had seconds to make a decision. "Hide," he said urgently, limping to the barn as fast as he could manage. "Soldiers coming. You have to hide now." Mara's face went pale, but she did not argue. She climbed into the loft and buried herself in the hay while Simon went back outside to meet the patrol. The leader was a man named Captain Brennan, grizzled and suspicious. "Simon Rothwell?" he asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "That is me," Simon said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What brings the militia out this far?" "Reports of orc activity in the area," Brennan said, his eyes scanning the homestead. "Tracks leading this direction. You seen anything?" "Nothing," Simon lied, hoping his face did not betray him. "I keep to myself out here." Brennan did not look convinced. "Mind if we look around?" "Just to be safe." Simon did mind, but refusing would only make them more suspicious. "Go ahead." The soldiers searched the cottage and the barn, and Simon's heart hammered the entire time. He tried not to look at the loft, tried not to think about what would happen if they found her. When one of the soldiers climbed the ladder to check the hay, Simon had to force himself to breathe normally. "Nothing up here," the soldier called down, and Simon nearly collapsed with relief. Mara must have found a better hiding spot, or the soldier had not looked closely enough, or some miracle had occurred. Brennan turned back to Simon, still suspicious but apparently satisfied. "You be careful out here, Rothwell. Orcs are dangerous and you are alone. If you see anything, you send word to the settlement." "I will," Simon said, though he had no intention of doing any such thing. The patrol finally left, and Simon waited until they were completely out of sight before going to the barn. "Mara," he called softly. "They are gone." She emerged from behind a false panel in the wall that Simon had not even known existed, her face tight with fear. "They almost found me." "But they did not," Simon said, pulling her into his arms. "You are safe." "For now," Mara said grimly, "but they will be back or others will come." "Someone has seen me, Simon. Someone knows I am here. Then we will be more careful." "There is no careful enough," Mara said, pulling away from him. "I should leave. It is the only way to keep you safe. If they find out you have been sheltering an orc, they will arrest you or worse." "No," Simon said firmly. "I am not letting you go. We will figure this out." But figuring it out proved harder than he anticipated. The patrols increased in frequency, and Mara spent more and more time hiding. The easy happiness they had found together was replaced by constant tension and fear. Simon could see it wearing on her, the way she jumped at every sound, the way she looked at the forest with longing. One morning, he woke to find her packing her things. "What are you doing?" "I am leaving," Mara said without looking at him. "I cannot keep living like this, Simon. Always hiding, always afraid. And I cannot ask you to keep lying for me, to risk everything for someone the world says you should not love." "I do not care what the world says," Simon argued, grabbing her hand. "I care about you. And I care about you, which is why I have to go." Mara finally met his eyes, and hers were full of tears. "If I stay, you will lose everything. Your home, your pension, maybe your life. I cannot be responsible for that. I have already taken so much from you." "You have given me more than you have taken," Simon said desperately. "Please, Mara. Do not do this." "I have to," she whispered, "because I love you enough to let you go." She pulled her hand free and walked toward the door. Simon tried to follow, but his bad leg betrayed him and he stumbled. By the time he caught his balance, she was already at the tree line. "Mara!" he shouted, but she did not turn back. She disappeared into the forest, and Simon was alone again. The days that followed were the worst of Simon's life. The cottage felt empty without her, and he found himself looking for her everywhere, listening for her footsteps, expecting to see her in the barn, finding her belongings and feeling his heart break all over again. He had been alone before Mara, but now that loneliness felt unbearable. He threw himself into work, trying to distract himself, but nothing helped. His leg hurt worse without her there to help him, and he fell twice trying to do tasks that had been easy with her assistance. On the fourth day, he found himself simply sitting on the porch, staring at the forest and wondering where she was, if she was safe, if she missed him as much as he missed her. That was when he made his decision. If the world would not let them be together here, then he would go to where they could be together. He would leave his homestead, his pension, his entire life behind. He would go into the forest and find Mara, and they would make a new life somewhere no one would look for them. It took him 2 days to prepare. He packed what supplies he could carry, wrote a letter giving his homestead to anyone who wanted it, and set out into the forest with nothing but his walking stick and a desperate determination to find the woman he loved. Tracking her was harder than he expected. Mara had covered her trail well, and his leg made traveling through the rough terrain agonizingly slow. But he kept going, following the faint signs. She had left a broken branch here, a footprint there, the remains of a campfire. He slept rough and ate sparingly, and his legs screamed in protest with every step, but he did not stop. On the third day he found her. She had made camp in a small clearing beside a stream, and she looked up in shock when he stumbled into the open. "Simon, what are you doing here?" "I came to find you," he said, leaning heavily on his walking stick. "Because you were right, we cannot be together at my homestead, but that does not mean we cannot be together at all." Mara stood slowly, her eyes wide. "You came after me. Of course I did." "Did you really think I would just let you go?" "I thought you would be sensible," Mara said, but there was no anger in her voice, only wonder. "I thought you would stay safe and comfortable and find a nice human woman to marry." "I do not want safe and comfortable," Simon said. "I want you. And if that means living in the forest and never seeing another human again, then that is what I will do." Mara crossed the clearing in 3 long strides and caught him as his leg finally gave out. She lowered him gently to the ground, and he saw that she was crying, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "You foolish, wonderful man, you should not have come." "I had to," Simon said simply. "Because I cannot live without you. I already tried, and it was worse than any pain my leg could cause." "What about your home, your life?" "You are my home. You are my life. Everything else is just details." Mara laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy. "Then I suppose we are both fools, because I cannot live without you either." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, and Simon knew he had made the right choice. Whatever hardships lay ahead, they would face them together. They spent the next few weeks traveling deeper into the wilderness, away from human settlements and orc territories alike. Mara knew the land well, and she led them to a remote valley where a small cabin stood abandoned. It had belonged to a trapper who died years ago, she explained, and no one had claimed it since. They made it their own, repairing the walls and roof, stocking it with supplies, creating a home far from the world that would not accept them. It was hard work, but Simon found he did not mind. His leg still hurt, but Mara was there to help him, and they built a life together one day at a time. Spring turned to summer, and summer to autumn. They hunted and foraged and tended a small garden. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They made love under the stars and woke up in each other's arms. They were happy in a way that neither of them had ever expected to be. One evening, as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset, Simon turned to Mara. "I want to marry you." Mara looked at him in surprise. "Marry me? How? There is no priest who would perform the ceremony, no law that would recognize it." "Then we will make our own ceremony," Simon said. "We will speak our vows to each other and to whatever gods are listening. We do not need anyone's permission to commit our lives to each other." Mara was quiet for a long moment, and then she smiled, that beautiful smile that showed her small tusks. "Yes, I will marry you, Simon Rothwell." They married themselves the next day, standing in the clearing beside their cabin. Simon spoke first, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you and stand by you for as long as I live. I promise to build a life with you and face whatever comes together. You are my home and my heart, and I am yours." Mara's voice shook slightly as she made her own vows. "I promise to protect you and care for you for as long as I draw breath. I promise to be your partner in all things, your shelter in storms, your companion in joy. You have given me a future I never thought I could have, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you what that means to me." They exchanged rings made of woven grass, and they kissed as husband and wife, and it was the most perfect moment of Simon's life. The years that followed were not always easy. Winters were harsh, and there were times when food was scarce and Simon's leg pained him so badly he could barely stand. But they endured together, finding strength in each other that they had never possessed alone. They saw no humans and no orcs, living in isolation by choice rather than by circumstance. Sometimes Simon wondered if they should feel lonely, cut off from the rest of the world. But every time he looked at Mara, strong, beautiful, stubborn Mara, he knew he had everything he needed. 5 years after they had married themselves in the clearing, Mara told him she was pregnant. Simon was terrified and overjoyed in equal measure, unsure what it would mean to raise a child who was both human and orc. But when their daughter was born, small and green-skinned with tiny tusks in her father's eyes, he fell in love all over again. They named her Sarah, and she grew up wild and happy in their hidden valley, learning to hunt from her mother and to read from her father, knowing nothing of the prejudices that had nearly kept her parents apart. She was proof that love was stronger than hate, that peace was possible even between those the world called enemies. One evening, when Sarah was 7 and playing by the stream, Simon took Mara's hand. They had grown older, gray threading through both their hair, lines marking their faces. His leg still hurt, but it was a familiar pain now, one he had learned to live with. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving everything behind to be with me." Mara looked at their daughter, then back at him, and her smile was radiant. "Never, not for a single moment. You gave me a life I never dreamed of, Simon. You gave me love and family and a home. Everything I left behind was just preparation for finding this." "I love you," Simon said, as he had said 1,000 times before and would say 1,000 times again. "I love you too," Mara replied, and she kissed him as the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in colors that had no names. They had started as enemies, become friends, and transformed into something the world had no words for, two broken people who had healed each other, who had chosen love over hate and hope over despair. They had built a life from nothing, and it was more than either of them had ever dared to dream. And every morning, when Simon woke to find Mara beside him and their daughter's laughter echoing through the valley, he remembered the neat stacks of firewood that had started everything. He remembered the shy orc woman who had tried to make amends for a war she had not started, and he was grateful beyond words that he had chosen to watch, to wait, and to open his heart to the impossible. Their story was one no bard would ever sing, no historian would ever record. But it was theirs, and it was real, and it was enough.